The old train station had long been abandoned, its platforms cracked, its windows boarded, its tracks swallowed by weeds. Locals avoided it after dark, whispering of strange sounds that echoed through the empty halls. One autumn night, a young man seeking shelter stepped inside with his backpack, saying he'd only stay until morning. When dawn arrived, the station was empty. His bag was found on a bench. He was never seen again. The old station sat at the far edge of town, where the weeds grew tall and the tracks led nowhere. Its iron frame and crumbling brick walls stood as a relic of a time when trains brought life and noise to the sleepy streets. Now the building was a husk, its paint peeling, its windows shattered, pigeons nesting in the rafters where voices once called out arrivals and departures. For most, it was a place to avoid. Children dared each other to touch the rusted gates, but few lingered long. Teenagers whispered about strange echoes that drifted through the halls at night, footsteps with no source, the hiss of a train that no longer ran, and the faint cry of a conductor calling out a schedule that hadn't existed in decades. Daniel Harper, 24, wasn't one to be swayed by ghost stories. He had grown up hearing them, laughing them off like most outsiders would. But that night, tired from traveling, he saw the station as nothing more than shelter. The benches might be cold, but at least there was a roof. He pulled his backpack higher on his shoulders, muttering. One night, just until morning, the air inside was colder than he expected. His flashlight beam swept across cracked tiles, faded posters still clinging to the walls, and a timetable board hanging askew with dates frozen in the past. His footsteps echoed too loudly, bouncing back from corners where shadows clung like cobwebs. He found a bench near the ticket window, its paint chipped and its wood splintered. Setting down his pack, he pulled out a bottle of water and a folded blanket. The silence pressed down heavily, broken only by the rustle of rats scurrying across the far platform. As midnight approached, Daniel drifted in and out of uneasy sleep. That was when he heard it, the faint sound of a train whistle. His eyes snapped open, heart pounding. He sat up, straining his ears. Again, the long, low cry of a whistle carried through the empty building, followed by the unmistakable sound of wheels grinding against tracks. He grabbed his flashlight, sweeping it across the station. The tracks outside lay choked with weeds, the rails rusted. There was no train, but the sound grew louder, closer, filling the air as if a locomotive were pulling into the platform. The floor vibrated faintly beneath his boots. Daniel stood, whispering to himself, "This can't be real." Through the broken glass of the main doors he saw light, a glow rushing down the tracks, too bright, too steady to be anything but a headlamp. His breath caught. The whistle screamed again, shaking the rafters. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The light vanished, the sound cut off mid-echo, leaving only silence. Daniel's hands trembled as he lowered the flashlight. He forced a laugh, muttering, "Just tired, just imagining things," but the unease gnawed at him. He picked up his backpack, considering leaving. Then he remembered how far the road was, how long the walk to town would be in the dark. With a shaky breath, he set his bag back on the bench. But as he lay back down, something made him freeze. On the floor beneath the timetable board, words had appeared, etched into the dust in long, deliberate strokes. "Do not board," Daniel whispered. Who wrote that?" He shined his light across the station, but the hall was empty. His skin prickled, his instincts screaming, but exhaustion dulled his fear. He pulled the blanket tighter around himself, whispering, it's fine, just the wind." Yet as he closed his eyes, the faint sound of footsteps echoed along the platform, slow, steady, approaching the bench where he lay. Daniel lay stiff on the splintered bench, heart hammering in his chest. The footsteps echoed closer, deliberate and steady, as though someone paced the platform just a few feet away. He forced himself upright, flashlight trembling in his grip. "Hello?" he called, his voice breaking the silence. No answer. Only the echo of his own words bouncing off the cracked walls. He swept the beam across the station. The platform stretched into darkness, weeds poking through broken tiles. Nothing moved, but the sound persisted, faint yet distinct. Heels tapping against stone, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Daniel's mouth went dry. He told himself it was an animal, maybe the scurrying of rats or a trick of old pipes settling. but deep down he knew the rhythm was human. He grabbed his backpack, ready to leave, when something caught his eye. On the far end of the platform stood a figure. It was faint, barely illuminated by his weak flashlight. A man in what looked like an old conductor's uniform. The hat sat low on his brow, the coat long and tattered, but the outline was unmistakable. The man stood motionless, head tilted as though watching Daniel. "Hey," Daniel called, though his voice shook. "Who's there?" The figure didn't respond. Slowly it raised one arm and pointed toward the tracks. Daniel's breath caught. He swung his light in that direction, but the rails were empty, rusted, overgrown. When he turned the beam back, the platform was empty too. The figure was gone. A cold sweat broke across his neck. He muttered, "I need to get out of here." Slinging his backpack over his shoulder, he hurried toward the station doors, but when he pushed them open, the night outside seemed wrong. The road he'd walked hours earlier was gone. In its place stretched endless tracks, gleaming as though freshly laid, stretching into a darkness lined with faint lanterns. Daniel staggered back, shaking his head. "No, no, this isn't real." The whistle returned, low and mournful, echoing through the air. Lights appeared on the horizon, rushing closer, brighter, until they bathed the entire station in a harsh glow. The building shook, dust raining from the rafters, as the roar of a train filled the air. But there was no train. The tracks remained empty, yet the noise was deafening, the vibrations undeniable. Daniel stumbled against the bench, hands over his ears. Then, with a sudden blinding flash, the sound cut off. Silence. The lanterns outside flickered out. The road returned. The rusted tracks lay broken once more. Daniel panted, gripping the edge of the bench. His flashlight beam shook wildly across the station walls. That was when he noticed something scratched into the wood beside him. Fresh gouges, deep and jagged. They spelled 3 words: "Next departure, you." Daniel's stomach lurched. He staggered back, his breath catching in his throat. Whoever or whatever was haunting this station, it was no longer just a story. It was waiting for him. The whistle cried again, softer this time, like a call only he could hear. Daniel's hands trembled as he traced the jagged letters carved into the bench. "Next departure, you." The message was too fresh. The wood splintered at the edges as though scratched moments before. His flashlight darted across the station, searching for the culprit, but the shadows yielded nothing. He forced a nervous laugh, muttering to himself, "It's just vandalism. Someone came here before me." But the words rang hollow. No one in town dared step foot inside the station after sunset. He was alone. At least he thought he was. The whistle returned, faint but clear. It echoed through the cracked beams overhead, vibrating in his chest. Daniel clutched his backpack tighter, edging toward the doors. The rusted hinges groaned as he pushed them open. Outside, the night air hit his face like ice. The road was back, stretching into darkness. The weeds rustled in the breeze. But as he stepped out, his flashlight caught movement on the far platform. A crowd, dozens of figures stood in line along the tracks, their shapes barely illuminated. Men, women, even children, silent, unmoving, all waiting. Their outlines shimmered faintly, like smoke caught in the glow of distant lanterns. Daniel froze, his chest tightening. "No, no, this isn't real." One figure turned its head toward him. Its face was pale, hollow-eyed, mouth slack as though frozen mid-breath. Then another turned, and another. Soon, the entire line of waiting passengers stared at him, their gazes unblinking. Daniel stumbled backward into the station, slamming the door shut. His pulse hammered in his ears. He whispered into the emptiness, "This is a dream. I'm dreaming." The silence stretched on. He sank onto the bench, burying his face in his hands. That was when he heard it again. Footsteps. But not outside this time. Inside. He lifted his head slowly, dread curdling in his stomach. The sound was deliberate, heels clicking against tile, approaching from the ticket window. His flashlight beam wavered as he swung it around. The conductor was back. The figure stood behind the glass, hat pulled low, coat tattered. Its face remained hidden in shadow, but its hand rested on the counter, long fingers tapping slowly, like the ticking of a clock. Daniel's voice shook. "What do you want from me?" The conductor lifted its head. 2 faint pinpricks of light glowed where its eyes should be. Slowly, it raised a skeletal hand and pointed once more toward the tracks. Daniel backed away, his throat dry. He shook his head, whispering, "No, I'm not going out there." The whistle blared, this time deafening, shaking the glass in the windows, rattling the rusted beams. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Daniel dropped to his knees, covering his ears, his flashlight rolling across the floor. The sound stretched on, endless, until he thought his skull would split, and then it stopped. The silence was absolute, too absolute. He retrieved the flashlight with trembling hands, sweeping it across the platform. The conductor was gone, but in the dust on the glass of the ticket window, words had appeared, written by an unseen hand. "Boarding now." Daniel stumbled back, breath ragged. He grabbed his backpack, slinging it over his shoulder. He had to leave. He didn't care if the walk back to town took all night. He needed to escape this place. But as he pushed the doors open once more, the sight outside made his blood run cold. The platform was filled again, this time closer. The crowd of waiting passengers stood only feet away, their hollow eyes fixed on him, their forms shimmering in the darkness. And behind them the glow of a train's headlamp pierced the night, rushing closer, brighter, until it swallowed everything in its path. Daniel staggered backward into the station as the blinding light bore down on him. He shielded his eyes, the roar of an approaching locomotive shaking the floor beneath his feet. The sound of screeching wheels, the hiss of steam, the clatter of metal, all of it filled the air. Yet when he forced himself to look again, the tracks outside were still broken, overgrown, lifeless. The crowd, however, remained. They stood perfectly still, packed along the platform, their ghostly shapes illuminated in the phantom glow. Their eyes reflected faint light, hollow and endless. No one spoke, no one moved. They simply stared. Daniel's knees threatened to buckle. He muttered to himself, "This isn't happening, this isn't real." But the air was too cold, the vibrations too strong, the presence too heavy to be anything but real. The whistle shrieked again, closer now. Daniel clutched his ears, but the sound seemed to bypass his body, lodging directly in his skull. His vision blurred, the walls of the station bending, the shadows stretching like grasping fingers. When the noise cut off, the silence that followed was worse. Slowly the crowd turned their heads in unison, all facing him at once. Their mouths opened, soundless, but the message was clear. "It's your turn." Daniel stumbled back toward the bench where his backpack lay. His flashlight beam landed on something new carved into the wood. He froze. The words had changed, no longer "next departure," "you." Now it read, "Passenger list updated." His stomach lurched. He swung the beam around desperately, searching for a way out. The station doors slammed shut with a thunderous crash, locking him inside. He ran to the ticket window, pounding against the glass. "Let me out," he screamed. The conductor appeared again, standing behind the glass, its glowing eyes fixed on him, unblinking. Slowly it reached into its coat and withdrew a small punch card, the kind used decades ago to mark tickets. With deliberate slowness, it pressed the card against the glass. Daniel's breath caught. The card bore his name. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible." The conductor lifted a metal punch and clipped the corner of the card. The sound was deafening, echoing through the entire station. At once, the phantom crowd stirred, shuffling closer, their hollow eyes burning brighter. Daniel grabbed his backpack and ran, darting through a side corridor he hadn't noticed before. The hallway twisted unnaturally, longer than the building should allow, lined with doors that led nowhere. His flashlight flickered, catching glimpses of advertisements peeling on the walls, ads for train journeys that hadn't existed in 50 years. Behind him, the sound of footsteps multiplied, dozens, then hundreds, echoing in pursuit. He dared not look back, but he could feel the crowd pressing closer, the air thick with their presence. He burst into what had once been the waiting room. Benches lined the walls, dust thick on every surface. A massive clock hung overhead, its hands frozen at midnight. The whistle blew again, rattling the glass as the clock hands jerked forward violently, ticking down toward some unseen departure. Daniel dropped to his knees, clutching his head. "I'm not supposed to be here," he whispered. "I didn't buy a ticket," the voices answered, layered and hollow, filling every corner of the station. "Everyone boards, no one leaves." The clock struck 12. The clock's chime thundered through the waiting room, each strike rattling the broken glass and vibrating through Daniel's bones. Midnight. The hands stopped, frozen once again. But the air was no longer still. A deep rumble spread through the floor, as though something massive approached from beneath the earth itself. Daniel scrambled to his feet, flashlight beams slicing across the room. Dust swirled like smoke, benches groaning as if straining under invisible weight. His backpack slipped from his shoulder, but he left it behind. Instinct told him to run, not to gather belongings. He rushed toward the opposite door, slamming his shoulder into it. It didn't budge. Behind him a hiss filled the room, low and steady. Steam, the kind that only came from engines. Daniel turned slowly, dread gripping him. The far wall shimmered, peeling like old paint, until a new image pushed through. A platform, pristine and lit by lanterns. A train, black and endless, slid silently into view, its iron body gleaming as if freshly polished. But there was no opening in the wall. It was as if two realities had overlapped, the ghost of the station's past bleeding into its present. The crowd of passengers was there too, waiting in perfect lines. Their faces were clearer now, men in hats, women clutching children, students with satchels, all pale, all hollow-eyed, all watching. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering words Daniel could not understand. The conductor stepped forward from their ranks, his glowing eyes locked onto Daniel as he raised a lantern high, its flame burned cold blue, casting long shadows across the room. He lifted his hand and gestured toward the phantom train. Daniel shook his head violently. "No, I'm not getting on. I'm not part of this." His voice cracked, echoing pathetically against the tiled walls. The whistle screamed, so loud it nearly knocked him off his feet. The benches shook, the floor split with hairline cracks, and the vision of the train grew sharper. He could hear the hiss of its brakes, the clang of its wheels, the groan of its doors as they slid open. For a moment, Daniel swore he felt a rush of air, cold and sharp, as if the train had actually arrived. His chest heaved. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but where? Every exit was sealed. He backed into a corner, flashlight trembling. The conductor began walking toward him, each step deliberate, his boots echoing like hammer strikes. The passengers followed, their feet scraping softly across the phantom platform. Daniel raised his flashlight higher, beam catching the punch card still clutched in the conductor's hand. His name glowed faintly on its surface, letters etched as though burned into the paper. Daniel Harper, passenger 301. "No," Daniel gasped. "I never bought a ticket." The conductor stopped inches away, towering over him. Slowly he raised the punch once more and clipped the card a second time. The sound cracked like thunder. Daniel's vision swam. The walls dissolved into mist. The waiting room stretched into an endless platform under a black sky. The train loomed before him, its open doors spilling pale light. Behind him, the crowd pressed closer, whispering, chanting, urging, "Board, board, board." Daniel clutched his chest, his heart racing as if it might explode. He dropped the flashlight, its beam rolling across the floor. The conductor extended a skeletal hand, palm open, waiting. Daniel whispered, "I don't want to go," but the crowd surged, pushing him forward, closer to the open doors. The cold light spilled across his face, swallowing his shadow. Daniel dug his heels into the cracked floor, fighting against the invisible force driving him toward the open train doors. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one clouding in the unnatural cold that filled the platform. The whispers swelled into a chorus, overlapping until they became one command, "Board." The conductor loomed just ahead, lantern glowing an eerie blue, his skeletal hand still outstretched. Daniel shook his head furiously. "No, I don't belong here." But the crowd pressed closer, hollow eyes fixed on him, their pale mouths moving soundlessly. He stumbled, falling to his knees. His flashlight had rolled near the edge of the platform, its beam cutting a weak arc across the phantom tracks. Daniel crawled toward it desperately, grasping it like a lifeline. He shined the light into the conductor's face. For the first time, the shadow shifted. What he saw nearly stopped his heart. The face wasn't empty, it flickered with dozens of others. Men, women, children, their features shifting like reflections on water. Some he didn't recognize, but others matched the passengers standing silently nearby. And then for an instant he saw himself, pale, hollow-eyed, already claimed. "No," Daniel screamed, clutching the light tighter. He aimed it at the train, but the doors yawned wider, spilling more of that pale glow. The rumble of its engine vibrated through his bones. Suddenly, the carvings on the bench behind him scraped fresh into the wood, letters etching themselves as though written by unseen hands. He spun, catching the words in his beam. No escape. Panic surged. He bolted away from the platform, down the twisting corridors of the station. His footsteps echoed wildly, chased by the phantom shuffle of countless others. The station warped around him, walls stretching, staircases leading nowhere. Every hallway brought him back to the same place, the waiting room and the clock, frozen at midnight. Daniel collapsed against a bench, sobbing, "I can't get out, I can't." The whistle screamed again, so loud it rattled his teeth. He clamped his hands over his ears, but it wasn't enough. His vision blurred, and when it cleared, he was back on the platform. The crowd waited patiently. The conductor stood tall, lantern burning brighter. The train's doors beckoned. Desperate, Daniel shouted into the darkness, "Why me? Why now?" For the first time a voice answered, not the whisper of many, but a single hollow tone that seemed to come from the conductor himself. "Every station needs passengers. Every passenger has their turn." Daniel's skin went cold. His mind spun with the realization. This wasn't random. The station had been taking people for decades, maybe longer. Anyone who lingered too long, anyone who stayed until midnight, was added to the list. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. The lantern's glow pressed closer, the crowd tightening around him. Their whispers returned, softer this time, coaxing, "It's easier if you don't fight." Daniel lifted his flashlight one last time. Its beam flickered weakly, battery dying. He aimed it at the train's interior. Rows of passengers already sat inside, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. One empty seat waited near the door. The conductor extended his hand again. The clock in the waiting room chimed once more, though it hadn't moved. Midnight, forever. Daniel's chest heaved as the circle of pale passengers pressed closer. Their whispering voices grew louder, blending into the steady rhythm of the train's engine. The open doorway glowed behind the conductor, spilling pale light across the platform, and the empty seat inside seemed to call his name. He stumbled backward, clutching the last strength in his legs. His flashlight sputtered, flickered, then died, leaving him in near total darkness. Only the lantern of the conductor remained, its cold flame burning blue. "No," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm not getting on. I won't." The conductor tilted his head slightly, as though studying him. Slowly, he lifted the punch card again. The name glowed faintly in the lantern's light. Daniel Harper, passenger 301. With mechanical precision, the conductor raised the metal punch and clipped the card once more. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The crowd responded instantly, shuffling forward in unison, their hollow eyes fixed on him. Daniel dropped to his knees, covering his face. "Please don't make me." The whistle screamed, deafening, shaking the very foundations of the station. The phantom train rumbled, steam hissing, its wheels clattering, though it never moved. The air grew icy, the scent of iron and smoke filling his lungs. Daniel's breath came in desperate gasps. Then, silence. When he lowered his hands, the crowd was gone. The platform was empty, the tracks broken and overgrown once more. The phantom glow vanished. The station stood in ruin, silent as it had been for decades. Daniel's chest rose and fell in disbelief. His eyes darted across the empty hall. "It's over," he whispered. "I made it." He laughed weakly, though the sound was cracked, brittle. He slung his backpack over his shoulder, clutching it like an anchor. But as he turned toward the doors, his steps faltered. Something was wrong. The wood of the bench had changed again. Fresh words carved deep into its surface. "Boarding delayed." Daniel's breath caught. He backed away, shaking his head. "No, no, it's done." The silence stretched too long. Then, faintly, from outside came the whistle, softer this time, distant, like an echo from the past. Daniel froze. His hand tightened on the strap of his bag. The whistle sounded again, closer now. The vibration returned beneath his feet, subtle but growing stronger. "No." His voice cracked. He bolted for the doors, slamming them open. The night air hit him, but it wasn't the road he saw. The tracks stretched endlessly once more, lanterns flickering faintly along the line. The crowd of passengers had returned, lined up silently in the pale glow. They hadn't moved since he last saw them, patient, unyielding, waiting. The conductor stood at their head, lantern raised, punch card glowing faintly in the dark. This time, there was no whistle to announce the train. Instead, the silence itself seemed to pull Daniel forward, the weight of inevitability pressing against his chest. His knees weakened. The strap of his backpack slipped through his trembling fingers, the bag thudding softly against the cracked tile. The conductor stepped forward, lantern swaying. The crowd whispered in unison, one phrase that wrapped around him like a noose. No one leaves. Daniel staggered back into the station, eyes wide, heart pounding. He realized the truth too late. There was no escape, no morning sun to save him. The station hadn't let him go. It had only given him a delay. The punch card glowed brighter, Daniel's name etched deeper into its surface. The final departure was near. Daniel's breathing came in shallow bursts as he staggered backward into the shadowed waiting room. The phantom platform outside flickered like a dying film reel, shifting between ruin and restoration, weeds and polished tile, silence and the murmur of ghostly passengers. The conductor's lantern glowed through it all, steady, cold, inevitable. He clutched his chest, whispering to himself, "It's not real. It can't be real." But the words rang hollow every time he blinked. The world changed. 1 second, he was in the decayed husk of the station. The next, in a place alive with echoes of a past long gone. The great clock loomed overhead, its frozen hands locked at midnight. Daniel raised his eyes to it, praying for any sign of movement, some proof that time hadn't ended for him. The second hand trembled once, then jerked forward. Click! The sound was soft but heavy with finality. The whistle followed, long, mournful, echoing through the walls. This time, there was no mistaking it. The train had arrived. The doors to the platform groaned open on their own. A rush of icy air swept through the room, smelling of coal and rust. Daniel's flashlight flickered weakly, then died completely, plunging him into the glow of the lanterns outside. He stumbled toward the doors, compelled and terrified. The crowd of passengers stood in perfect rows, faces blank, eyes glowing faintly. Their whispers pressed against his skull. "Board! Board! Board!" The conductor raised his punch card once more, holding it high. The letters of Daniel's name shone like fire in the cold air. With slow, deliberate motion, the conductor clipped the final corner. The sound cracked through the station like thunder. The ground vibrated. The phantom train materialized fully this time, massive and dark, its engine hissing, its wheels grinding against polished tracks that shouldn't exist. The headlamp blazed, bathing everything in pale, merciless light. The doors slid open with a groan, revealing rows of passengers already seated inside. An empty place waited near the entrance, seat 301. Daniel's legs shook. He whispered, "I'm not going," but his body betrayed him. Each step dragged him closer, his will stripped away by the chorus of voices. The passengers leaned forward in unison, hollow mouths stretching as though in anticipation. He clutched the doorframe, fighting with the last of his strength. His screams tore through the night. "I don't want this. I don't belong here." But the conductor's shadow fell across him, long and heavy. The skeletal hand gripped his shoulder with icy finality. The force pulled him inside. The train's doors slammed shut. The whistle shrieked once, triumphant and deafening. With a lurch, the train began to move. Wheels clattered. Steam hissed. The engine roared. The crowd on the platform faded into mist as the train barreled forward into darkness, carrying Daniel with it. When morning came, the station was silent again. The weeds grew tall along the broken tracks, the benches coated in dust. On one seat lay Daniel's backpack, untouched, as though waiting for someone to claim it. But the man himself was gone. Locals whispered of the lights that had flickered through the night, of the whistle that carried across the valley long after trains had stopped running. And they said that if you pressed your ear against the old ticket window, you could still hear the echo of a voice, Daniel's voice, pleading to be let off. But no one leaves the last train. The old train station still stands at the edge of town, its tracks broken, its platforms empty. Yet some nights, when the fog is heavy, locals swear they hear the long cry of a whistle and see lanterns glowing faintly in the dark. Daniel Harper's backpack was found on a bench, but he never returned. They say he boarded the last train, the one that always comes at midnight, and from which no passenger ever comes back.